The views, information, and opinions expressed during the following program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent the views of Access Communications, its representatives, or its employees.
We're back. On this first episode, we take a look at who's out and who's in for the new season. Where do you think the Riders will finish in the West for 2024? Taylor Shire from the Regina Leader-Post is with us, and John Hodge from 3 Down Nation 2. In the Huddle for a new year starts now.
In the Huddle is presented by Access Communications, bringing you Saskatchewan's team. Brought to you by the official vehicle sponsor for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, Capital Automotive Group. We drive Rider Nation.
It's truck time at Capital Ford in Regina. For a limited time, get rates as low as 0% OAC on a huge selection of Ford F-150s, including the all-new Lightning. Capital Ford in Regina.
We're back. It's finally time to talk football. Brendan McGuire and Marshall Hamilton for another season of In the Huddle, and we are at the AccessNow TV World Headquarters, but Spencer, our producer, wanted me to mention we are in the TV Studio A. It's fancy new lights, not so hot.
Stage at a rock concert or something, but makes me feel pretty impotent.
Those other lights, I used to feel the burn. These are not so bad. It's a lot cooler in here now. How many, putting you on the spot, how many years have you been doing this show now?
It's not a simple answer. I probably did for 4 or 5 years a guest appearance twice a year kind of thing, and then Rod Peterson, who was the host back then, asked me to come on and do. I think John Lynch was in the chair before I was in the chair, so I probably started about 14, 15 years ago, and probably been doing this on a more permanent basis for 10.
Just like riding a bike.
That's how I got all these gray hairs.
Yeah, right.
Talking
from this
football.
From this, well, the last 2 years anyway, since the COVID is what gave me the gray hair
since you came on.
Yeah, right. It's my fault. It's all on me. But just like riding a bike.
Yep.
But we figured I had a good visit to sit down with Kevin Foote the other day.
Yep.
We were going back to, this show started as Saskatchewan Rough Rider magazine, something like 40 years ago. But anyways, we'll get into that as the season goes and do a look back on the history of this great program. Well, the off-season is finally over and it's time to play ball. Many a change in Riderville over the off-season. Some fans are happy and some say it wasn't enough. Corey Mace is the new sideline sheriff, and much like Trevor Harris a year earlier, he's being touted as the latest savior for a Rider Nation that has grown impatient since the disastrous 2022 season, and Coach Mace is now the one who we're all being told can solve the problems that plagued this team with miserable finishes in each of the last 2 seasons. Marshall, can one person really make that big a difference?
Yeah, my short answer to that is yes. And that's true in life, that's true in business, that's true in sports. Whether it's one player, one coach, one general manager, one president and CEO. We lost Jim Hobson a number of months ago, or a couple of months ago, and when you think about his career, you reflect on what an impact that one guy had on this franchise. You look at the people that are in the, I don't know what they call it in Saskatchewan, the Wall of Fame or the Plaza of Honor. That's the word I'm looking for. Every one of those people that was inducted made a big difference for that era that they played, or that era that they were part or coached or whatever. Look at the impact that Kent Austin had in the 1 year that he came back and coached in, I think it was 2007, where the Riders went on and won the Grey Cup. So yes, that doesn't mean Corey Mace is the anointed one now and he will bring all wonderful things to Saskatchewan. But so far, and you'll probably want a more detailed answer than this, but so far I think he's off to a really good start.
Yeah, I'm really surprised at how much the fan base seems to have bought in. A fan base that's become very jaded the last few years, and we've seen it with the empty seats at Mosaic Stadium. And I've looked back on the history over the last 40-some years, and I've wondered in my mind, what could bring this down? What could bring this back to where we needed telethons, you know, because that just seems like a total other universe. And in the history of the franchise, it seems like any 2 bad years in a row has put it in the ditch, other than in 2015 and 16, but then we had a new stadium the next year. So now we're coming off 2 really, not just bad years, but just the way they ended. It felt like there was a real rain cloud stench, whatever you want to call it, hanging over Riderville. And yet in this off season, I feel like the fan base likes the new head coach. And I'm glad we had that picture of O'Day and Mace up at the podium together, because I was there the day of the news conference, and just watching the smirk on O'Day's face when Mace was making jokes, talking, I could tell he won him over just from the conversation. And it's really funny how you said at the end of you said at the end of last season that the interview does matter, because I was making the argument that the interview is not that important. We know Milanovic is the guy, blah, blah, blah. And you said, no, it has to be a serious interview. I think he got hired based off his interview more than anything else.
Yeah, I have no inside information, but I stand by what I said at the end of last year. The interview is really important. And I've sat across the table. I did a career of human resources. And when you're in human resources, one of the things that you get involved with, especially earlier in your career, is a lot of recruiting. And I've sat across from people that I wanted to reach across, not literally, figuratively, and grab them by the scruff of the neck and say, do you even want this job? Because they're just not demonstrating that. And I've had another one that I hired. I won't mention him by name because I don't want to out him. But at the end of the interview, and he was sort of, you know, in that 6 to 7 out of 10 category with me. And he looked me in the eye and he said, I really want this job.
Which were the words that Corey Mace said. He had a little more profanity.
And that was profound for me. He ended up being a great hire. He's gone on to have a great career. He's a lot younger than I am, so he's still in the middle of it. But, you know, that meant a lot to me. So I don't know what Corey Mace said to Jeremy O'Day, et cetera, but he reached across the table and said, I'm the guy. Here's why I think you should hire me, and I want this job. And here's why I want this job. And here's what I'm going to do when I get this job. You know, and that enthusiasm that he's shown in the small amounts that I've seen so far, I'm not surprised that they hired him, because, and you just mentioned Scott Milanovic's name. And yeah, he was high on the list last year. He wasn't necessarily high on my list, but he was high on the list. I haven't even thought about him. I have no afterthoughts like, why didn't they hire Scott Milanovic? I think Corey Mace has been a really good hire, but we're really early in the process here. But some of the things that he's done and said so far, I'm impressed.
He's doing and saying the right things. And I actually thought even something as small as whether he was going to live here all off season played a role in it, because Milanovic said, you know, I'll be there, I'll be ready to rock during the season. But he had no interest in living here. And I think it's because his family's in Florida and it's easier to get to Florida from Toronto. And even though we don't really blame anybody for wanting to spend their winter in Florida, but the fact that Mace not only was willing to come here, but acted like he wanted to come here and live in the off season, I think that was huge.
Yeah, and if you don't mind us sticking with this topic for at least another minute, let's compare. And if I had a piece of paper and, you know, a quiet hour at home, I could come up with some pretty interesting points. But compare Chris Jones, who everybody knows I'm not a fan of, to Corey Mace. What did Chris Jones say in his interview? What did Corey Mace say in his interview? What did he say in his first press conference? What did he say in his? And you go through that list and go, X, check mark, X, check mark, X, check mark. Corey Mace is hitting all the right buttons. He's appealing to the fan base. He's appealing to our unique climate. He's appealing to our sense of community. He's appealing to, you know, wanting to have, and this was just in yesterday's news, he didn't call the discipline that was imposed on one of the players discipline. He called it accountability. And that's, you know, he's just check mark, check mark, check mark. And Chris Jones, you know, just kept falling flat on his face and relying, well, look, I won a Grey Cup and look at my record. And, you know,
it was all business with him.
Yeah. And for him, it was all me. With Corey Mace, it's all about the team. It's all about the province. It's all about the community. It's all about the team. So early stages, but I like what I see so far.
Well, and the bar's set pretty low when you consider not only the record the Riders have finished the last 2 years, but the record Chris Jones has had the last 2 years in Edmonton. So Corey Mace has a lot of rope to work with going into his first season as head coach of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. I mentioned Trevor Harris a little bit earlier about how it was almost like he was to last offseason what Mace is to this offseason, the savior that was going to fix everything. And speaking of Trevor, the TH7 method worked pretty good for the start of the year last season. Not so much once he took off for that gallop into the Stampeder defense that changed the lives of so many, not the least of which was him. Now 38 years young, Trevor isn't so certain that he wants to play until he's 45 like Tom Brady, but rather he's taking it year by year. Marshall, no one would blame Trevor Harris for his enthusiasm waning just a little, but do we have confidence he can bounce back to being the same Trevor Harris who led the Riders to a 3-1 start out of the chute before he got hurt last year?
Yeah, I do. I still am as high on Trevor Harris this year as I was at this time last year. We're seeing in football, both in the National Football League and the Canadian Football League, quarterbacks playing longer. Quarterbacks, at least the smart ones, the ones that have experience and the ones that don't just rely on their legs, that rely on their ability to read defenses, ability to move defenses, ability to call plays, ability to audible, etc. Those quarterbacks can hang around. Not everybody's going to, live and play like Tom Brady did, but Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Warren Moon. There's numerous examples in the National Football League and the Canadian Football League. Look at Damon Allen in the Canadian Football League. The players playing into their late 30s and sometimes even into their early 40s. If you're healthy and you can find a way to stay healthy, Trevor Harris can have a great season. And I think the weapons that are being built around him are very effective. And I thought he was off to a really good start last year, but you got to stay healthy. And I think he will learn from that.
It felt like he just knew how to win. A good example was that really low-scoring game that they won on the Rouge late against Edmonton. Offense wasn't moving. Yeah. It was really a terrible football game till halfway through the fourth quarter. But when they needed a drive, they got it. And sometimes I think of the example that Steve Mariucci used to bring up a lot when I used to watch the NFL Network quite a bit. He tells the story of the last year of Steve Young, quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers. They started 3-1, and he was concussed and his career was ended. They ended up going 4-12. And he said, people forget, we transitioned through to Jeff Garcia that year. The offense kept being productive, doing the right things. Our defense all of a sudden couldn't stop anybody. We lost our leader, so we lost our mojo. And I feel like some of that happened with the Rough Riders last year. You just felt like you were in good hands. You had nothing to worry about when you had Trevor Harris back there. And that's not a dig at any of the other quarterbacks, but they just didn't have that presence, or they weren't able to duplicate that presence.
I think Trevor Harris, with his experience, has learned that the role of a quarterback, more so than any other position on the field, is don't lose the game, right? As opposed to when you're young in your career, you think, I got to go out there and win this game. Well, you don't have to win the game. If you don't make mistakes, and if you rely on the weapons around you, you could just be, like a point guard in basketball, handing off the ball, short dink and dunks and stuff. And don't throw interceptions, don't get fumbles, don't get sacked. Don't lose the game. I mean, to use an example, and I know everybody's going to hate this when I use it as an example. When I play pickleball, I talk to my partner and I say, let's not lose this game. Let's let them lose this game. So if you just keep the ball in play, and let them hit the ones that are out. Let them hit the ones that are into the net. Let them make the mistakes. And if you make fewer mistakes than the other team, you win.
Just do the little things right.
So it's not just winning the game. It's don't lose the game. And quarterbacks, I've already mentioned them already, fumbles, interceptions, turnovers. Those are the things that kill teams. And Trevor Harris, as a veteran, I think understands that, if we don't have it on offense, let's just not lose the game. Let's give our special teams a chance. Let's give our defense a chance. And maybe later in the game, we'll get our offense rolling as well. So stay in the game as long as you can by not making mistakes.
Dave Thomas, the new broadcaster for the Rough Riders, pointed out that if you extrapolated his numbers over an 18-game season, he would have had the second most amount of passing yardage in the league, like playing it safe. So he still got the production and the totals that you would need, at least on a per capita basis. Yep. I think it's absolutely appropriate that you would reference pickleball as an example for this. And just one more point. before we finish beating that dead horse. I thought one thing that spoke volumes about Trevor Harris's character was actually at the end of the season opening win in Edmonton last year. You might remember that Coach Dickinson called a pass play, or someone called a pass play. Coach Dickinson would have had to authorize it. And I think what they were trying to do was just kill the clock. And Harris rolled out and he got rocked. And after, when they were interviewing, they said, "Are you okay for next week?" And he said, "I'm fine, I think." And but it was the fact that he didn't make a mountain out of a molehill, right? Coach made a really silly decision. One of the coaches, let's be honest, a foolish decision. And yet he wasn't trying to throw anyone under the bus. He was just, we'll get through this, on to the next one. Because the winning, the success was more important than bickering or pointing fingers or whatever.
Yeah, so the one word I'd use to describe Trevor Harris, and that's a great example, is he's professional. He's
very professional.
He's very mature, and he's mature and professional.
Yeah. A new schedule this year for the Canadian Football League. Fans in Saskatchewan, as well as all the other markets, will see every other team in their home park at least once. And that means every other quarterback in their home park at least once. That means the Rider fan base will get their first chance to see Cody Fajardo wearing a Montreal Alouettes uniform at Mosaic Stadium. Circle Friday, August 16th on your calendar for that one. Marshall, I feel like there's a Montreal-Saskatchewan rivalry that's been cranked up since how the Grey Cup ended. I'm circling that date on for the Alouettes' visit to Regina. How about you?
No, not any more than any other game, because it's just one out of 18 games that the Saskatchewan Roughriders are going to play against a worthy opponent, and the more of them they win, the better their chance of making the playoffs and getting to the big dance. I mean, when you have as much movement between teams as we have in the Canadian Football League, and it's not a lot different in the other sports. The NFL is probably one exception. You're always going to be lining up against people that used to be teammates. You know, so but I understand where you're coming from. I mean, Trevor Harris came from Montreal, Cody Fajardo came from Saskatchewan, and they're going head to head against each other.
There'll always be that comparison.
And there's others that you could mention along those same veins, but. So yes, there is a rivalry there, but you know, it's maybe more recent than some of the other teams, but you know, back in when I was growing up watching football, I mean, Saskatchewan-Hamilton was a huge rivalry. Saskatchewan-Ottawa was a huge rivalry. Not as much Saskatchewan-Toronto, not as much Saskatchewan and Montreal. But usually the rivalries are in your own division, you know, playing against the Edmonton Eskimos every year, playing against the Calgary Stampeders every year. Now the British Columbia Lions are a really good football team. Winnipeg, obvious, you know, Labor Day, Banjo Bowl, etc. There's rivalries with every team, and there's player movement that means you're always lining up against at least somebody on the opposition that was a former teammate. So I'm not circling that one any more than any other game.
Well, and that's always going to be a fact of life. Former teammates coming at least until we expand this league a little bit from the 9 teams that we're at right now. There's been an awful lot of hype with AJ Ouellette being the prized free agent signing this offseason. I didn't think Jamal Morrow was so bad last year, but given how he failed his physical with the Stampeders, maybe the Riders did dodge a bullet in this running back swap. Marshall, you've played quarterback before. Would you rather have a sledgehammer running back at your side or the multi-dimensional but smaller Jamal Morrow?
Well, let me answer it in a roundabout way. Would you love to have George Reed back?
We all know the
answer to that.
Even in today's game. Today's game is a lot different than back then.
George Reed was a sledgehammer.
Right.
And I love, you know, watching him play for many, many reasons, but, you know, especially against Calgary. Him and the middle linebacker, the name just escaped me, with the Calgary Stampeders, just banging heads 20 times every single game. I loved George Reed. I loved that sledgehammer approach. My offensive lineman, not to mine, his offensive lineman probably loved blocking for him because they knew where he was going to go, and they knew that if they just gave him a crack, he'd bowl his way through the crack, as opposed to, you know, these scat backs that skate around in the background for a long time and then find an opening. And sometimes they break it for 100, but most times they're losing 3 or 4 yards. So I would I'm not trying to describe Jamal Morrow, but I love Ouellette. I love his demeanor. I love his football style. I love his downhill running style. I even like, you know, his hair. I would never wear it like this, but I love his hair and his beard and, you know, the face paint and stuff that's on there. He looks like the animal from Sesame Street. I'm excited to watch him this year. I think he's going to be a fun guy to watch, and I think he will embody what Saskatchewan likes to have in a running back.
If he gets 1,000 yards by Labor Day, we'll get you wearing that wig. Just you watch.
Hey, I will wear it
if he gets that far by Labor Day.
If he gets that far, I will.
Going to hold you to that. We have video evidence.
That's fine.
But yeah,
Man of my word, I'll do it.
It seems like this has been a huge project for them since the sack problems that they had Cody's last year here, 2022. And we'll talk about this later with Taylor Shire, but they've still got an open spot at the tackle position. It'll be interesting to see if they can fix that, because even though they've got maybe the best tackle in the league in Jamarcus Hardrick, and they seem to have solidified the three guys in the middle, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if they still have trouble at that one tackle spot, it could be deja vu all over again. But with that upgrade, having the quarterback who gets the ball out quickly with A.J. Ouellette, if there's a team that has no excuse to have sack problems this year, it'll be the Saskatchewan Roughriders. It'll be interesting to see how they respond.
I really like what I see so far, and I haven't been at training camp because it's up in Saskatoon, and I live just outside of Regina. But what I've heard about Jamarcus Hardrick just made me want him even more on our football team. His attitude. And attitude, the first question you asked me on the program was, can one person make a difference? Yeah, one person can make a difference. And Jamarcus Hardrick will make a difference on that offensive line. Not just because of the man he blocks every time, but because of how he will build a team of offensive line, probably more so than any other position on the football field, is a team. They really have
their own group.
They have to work together. They all look the same. They all lift weights the same. They all eat the same, too much, etc. But Jamarcus Hardrick will help build a team on that offensive line. Whoever their fifth piece is, we don't know yet. But I guarantee you Jamarcus Hardrick will do everything within his power, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, not just physically, get that offensive line ready, including that missing piece.
The intangibles, we call that.
Yep.
And it should be pointed out that in Trevor Harris's first interview upon signing with the Riders last offseason, he just raved about the chance to work with Kian Schiefer-Baker. Because of the injuries, that hasn't happened yet. KSB missed the first half of the regular season with a torn labrum that needed to be fixed. By the time he returned in August, Trevor Harris was already out for the year from his own lower body injury. Now that TH7 and KSB 89 will actually get a shot to make some magic together, Marshall, I feel like Harris's quick release and Schiefer-Baker's shiftiness make this a new weapon that Mark Mueller's offense can use to space things out a bit, maybe. Something we haven't seen yet.
Well, first of all, you're throwing me all off of this TH7 and KSB.
KSB 89. I totally made up the KSB 89.
What's my handle now? I thought I was Marshall Hamilton. But anyway.
MH24.
No, I'm excited. Too late to label me. No, I'm excited to see what he can do with Kian Schiefer-Baker. I mean, Trevor Harris has always impressed me, and you've heard me on this program numerous times talk about his intelligence, his ability to read the defense before the ball is snapped, his ability to read quick and dump to the right guy. You don't have to throw the ball 20 yards downfield to get a 20-yard gain. You just need to complete a pass to the right guy who's already in motion and can get there. And I think Kian Schiefer-Baker's got tremendous talent. And I'm sure Trevor Harris recognizes that talent, and they will do well together if they can both stay healthy. So I'm excited about that combination, but not just that combination. I think there's some other players that we can talk about that will have good seasons with Trevor Harris as their quarterback.
The speed and shiftiness of Schiefer-Baker, I think, will help, especially in an offense where you get the ball out so fast, and sometimes you have to do more of those short passes, but that can be the great equalizer. And KSB should be at his ultimate mobility, I think, now that he's almost a year removed from that surgery. Okay, coming up next, Taylor Shire from the Regina Leader-Post joins us from training camp. You're watching In the Huddle on AccessNow Sports.
Hi, I'm Kavis Reed with the Ball Leadership Podcast. Join us on Access Now as we have a little laugh and serious conversation about everything leadership. And don't worry, you don't have to be bald to enjoy.
Every child deserves a chance. That's the dream behind the Access Communications Children's Fund. Our registered charity provides assistance to local organizations with projects helping children at risk or in need across the province. Since launching our registered charity in 1992, we've donated over $3.5 million to projects in Saskatchewan. If you know a nonprofit or charitable organization in need of funding, we encourage you to visit myaccess.ca/children's fund.
Tune in for your chance to win big with the Access Communications Children's Fund TV Bingo every Saturday at 5 with a prize board between $7,000 and $15,000. Cards are $14 with all proceeds going to the Access Communications Children's Fund. Watch and play every Saturday at 5 for your chance to win. The Access Communications Children's Fund TV Bingo, only on AccessNow TV. This week's jackpot is $2,500 in 50 numbers or less. Visit myaccess.ca/TV Bingo for more.
Big thank you to Boston Pizza for taking care of our guests. A pizza touchdown at any one of our Regina locations. www.bostonpizza.com. Brendan McGuire, Marshall Hamilton, very pleased to be joined by Taylor Shire, who I know is keeping a watchful eye on what's happening in Saskatoon with training camp. What is this background you have? Are you a Habs fan?
I am a Habs fan through and through.
Well, at least he comes by it honestly. Looking at the training camp situation, based on what you've seen so far, do you think that Coach Mace is approaching this any differently than Coach Dickinson did a year ago?
I think it's completely different. I think it not only feels like a new season, but it feels like sort of a new team. I don't know how much carryover really there is in terms of the vibe and the mood around last year. Obviously, if the key faces are back, and Trevor Harris and some of the star players, Sean Bain, and some of the guys on defense as well. But when you think about the coaching staff, there's only basically 2 returning coaches from last year. So Corey Mace has brought in this game plan of little tidbits that he's learned over the years on how to run a good training camp, and he's basically made his own plan. And yeah, from what I can tell, it feels completely different. I think it looks the same, right? There's 100 players, a bunch of positions. They all do, individual workouts and then team workouts. So the look is the same, but the vibe, the mood, the energy, the atmosphere, I think is different. And I think it's improved.
Taylor, I heard something on the radio yesterday that I'll paraphrase, that it was involved a player who I don't think was named, or maybe if he was named, I didn't recognize the name. It was probably a rookie, but he was carrying bags. And I think Corey Mace was walking beside him, and he was asked later if that was a form of discipline. And he said, we don't use the word discipline, we use the word accountability. And I'm just wondering, with that as sort of a backdrop to the question, what are you seeing in terms of the presence he has on the field and the impact he has on the players?
Well, I think I just want to go back to last year. I think one of the issues that we talked about with Dickinson, he's a great guy, great person off the field, great person on the field, but he didn't necessarily have that accountability from the guys. We'd see penalties and there would be no repercussions for any bad penalties, stupid plays, this, that, and the other. And one of the things when Coach Mace was hired was he talked about that accountability during his opening press conference and how guys need to be bought in and have to, own up to their rights and wrongs, right? They can be celebrated, but they can also be reprimanded for things that they do wrong, whether it's a missed assignment, penalty, whatever. So he has that sort of hard-nosed approach to be like, you're gonna play the right way. We're gonna love you when you play the right way, but when you don't play the right way, you're gonna be accountable. So it's not only gonna happen when they line up offside on the 1 yard line, like we saw last year. There was no accountability from that. It's not only going to happen during the games this year, but obviously it's extending right through training camp. So that's a change that was certainly needed from last couple of years, and it's nice to see that already, coming to fruition.
Always seemed like there was that underlying perception that Coach Dickinson was always trying to figure out how to be harsh or how to dance around it, whereas Corey Mace, being a former player who's played for lots of coaches, is saying, you deal with it head on, just like the way he was probably dealt with head on when he played.
And I will say, as a former player, although we may not say it out loud or we may not say it in the media, we are glad he's doing that, because we don't like to see one of our teammates get away with murder. Obviously, I'm exaggerating the point. We don't want to see that our teammates get away with that. We want to see our coach deal with it. So hats off to Corey Mace.
And you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if somebody's jumping offside, then that's going to be a problem. We're hearing that the offensive line will have a very heated battle for the starting left tackle spot opposite of Jamarcus Hardrick. Can you tell us of any odds-on favorite that you have for who will win that job?
Well, Trevor Reed is the guy right now that's getting the reps with the number one, so it looks like it's his job to lose. It's going to be an American rookie that will start at left tackle this year, and from what I can tell so far, Trevor Reed is that guy. Of course, Jamarcus Hardrick is the other guy on the right side. He is no doubt going to be the starter on week one. And then, there's 4 Americans really penciled in or sort of in competition for that left tackle spot. Brandon Council not coming back last year. Eric Lofton signed elsewhere in free agency. And Gerald Hawkins, who was one of the guys they were high on camp last year, is not reporting this year. Jeremy O'Day telling me earlier before camp opened that he's just not into it physically and mentally anymore. He's sort of age has sort of caught up with him. So it's going to be a wide open competition, although Trevor Reed is certainly the front runner right now. I think it's really going to come down to the execution in the preseason games. I imagine Reed will get, the first crack at that spot in the preseason since he is getting the first reps at training camp. So if he shows well, it's going to be his job week one. But if he doesn't show well, there's going to be opportunity for others.
The fact that they have reserved those 2 spots for Americans the last 2 years, and they've still had trouble filling that spot, I think has given us all a new appreciation for how hard it is to not only build an offensive line, but especially have, for lack of a better term, competent tackles, doesn't it? And it also underscores how different the Canadian game is, that these American tackles who have been great in some cases at their American elite colleges can't come up here and just plug this for us.
Yeah, I mean, they were kind of bit by the injury bug last year. Injuries aren't really excuses, but they did have Gerald Hawkins, he had some NFL experience, and then they also signed Colin Kelly. So I think we saw for maybe 2 or 3 games where both of those tackles started for the Riders until both of them were ultimately hurt for the rest of the season. So I feel like if Kelly and Hawkins would have played more last year, I feel like the offensive line would have been more competent, but they were hurt. Eric Lofton, Brandon Council were forced to play. They even started at left tackle, right tackle, and then they switched. So I don't really know if that was, if those 2 guys are the answer. I don't certainly think they played, they weren't all-stars last year by any stretch of the imagination. So they needed to improve the tackle position this year. The interior is going to be the same, but the offensive tackles will both be different, and I think they are largely upgraded. Now it's about staying healthy.
Anybody who's watched the Canadian Football League for the last sort of 5 or more years knows the talent of Jamarcus Hardrick. That part's obvious when you watch him play. But at training camp, you get to see things that we don't get a chance to see on television. What are you seeing of the intangibles in terms of his teamwork, his leadership, his communication skills, et cetera? Are you seeing any examples of, yes, I'm really glad we got that guy on our team?
Yeah, he's a glue guy. He's an energy bringer. He's all of that. And he'll admit, I don't want to speak for him, but he will say he's not the best blocker in the league. But what he brings in terms of energy, in terms of all of those other intangibles, is really what makes him an all-star and one of those guys that you want on your team. So I'm not slighting Jamarcus Hardrick because I think he's a good blocker, but he has said, he's not the best blocker, but it's what he brings to the table that is going to, I believe, bring this offensive line to another level this year. So yeah, he's at any position. You want a guy like that that's going to bring the energy, bring the guys together, be that glue guy. And even I could see him being sort of a middleman in any confrontations, right? Being that veteran guy to sort anything out if something goes wrong in the locker room, on the field, on the sideline, whatever it might be. So a very positive guy, but I think a guy who knows when it's time to put your head down and go to work.
I just one quick commentary, editorial on my part. I think, and I mean this as a compliment, not as a criticism, but I think he's got a nasty side to him, and that's a really nice quality to have as an offensive lineman, because sometimes you're doing some pretty nasty stuff, and the person that does it nastier wins the war.
And knows where to find the line, not like some of the other defensive linemen who we won't mention.
That's a different kind of nasty.
Years, right? At quarterback, we know Trevor Harris is the number 1, but after that, it's kind of the Wild West. The smart money coming into camp would have suggested that Mason Fine will be the number 2, and Shea Patterson will battle it out with Antonio Pipkin for the number 3/short yardage quarterback. I've always felt like Patterson would be the odd man out myself. Could you see any other scenario shaking down Taylor aside from the one I just described?
Well, I think Mason Fine, it's his job to lose. So that's really going to be dependent on the preseason, I believe. If Shea Patterson, I feel like Shea Patterson is coming into this season with a lot to prove. He was beat out for that backup spot last year. He ultimately even lost the short yardage job to Pipkin, who comes in, as they come in short yardage QB this year. So where does Patterson fit in? He's going to be entering that first preseason game and wanting to prove a lot, wanting to prove he belongs not only on this team but in the league, right? Because if you get cut, you never know where else you could wind up if another team wants to bring in a veteran like Patterson, who's been around the league quite a bit. So he's not only fighting for his job but with this team, but I think across the league as well. So he's definitely going to be one I want to watch. We all know what Mason Fine can do. They believe he's competent enough to be a backup quarterback. They signed him to a 2-year deal this offseason, electing to not re-sign Jake Dolagala, who I believe was the superior quarterback last year. But the Riders saw it differently from the film, and they're going to go with Fine. I'm going to say odds on he's got an 80% chance of being that backup for week 1. But if Pipkin, even rookie Jack Cohn, surpasses him, and especially Patterson surpasses Fine in the preseason, then there will be a change made this year.
I thought that was kind of a bold move on their part to pick Fine over Dolagala. We will see how it all unfolds. Taylor Shire, you can read his stuff at leaderpost.com. Thanks for this. We look forward to visiting throughout the season. Up next, John Hodge joins us from 3 Down Nation. You're watching In the Huddle on Access Now Sports.
The 35th Annual Saskatchewan Country Music Awards. Watch it live, Saturday, June 22nd at 7 p.m. on AccessNow TV or the AccessNow TV app. For more details, visit myaccess.ca/SCMA. The 77th Annual Yorkton Film Festival, Golden Sheaf Awards Gala, North America's longest-running film festival. Watch it live, May 25th at 8 p.m. on AccessNow TV or the AccessNow TV app.
And we're back on this very first edition of In the Huddle for 2024 from Access World Headquarters. Brendan McGuire, Marshall Hamilton, very pleased to be joined by John Hodge, who figured he had enough hair on his face that he didn't need any more on his head going into this season, turning over a new leaf, a new fashion look. John, you've been all over the Chad Kelly story since day one. Because of his legal situation, the Argos will be without their most important player for at least half the season. Does his absence hurt them or the CFL as much as the public beating that they've been taking for being so wishy-washy on this subject all off-season?
Well, I mean, on the field, Cameron Dukes, I don't think there's any denying he's not Chad Kelly. Now, with that being said, I also think it's important to note Chad Kelly, as much as he was named MOP, he was also, I think, the beneficiary of playing on a great team with a great coaching staff. He only threw 23 touchdown passes last season as the MOP. And Cameron Dukes, I thought, looked good when he got the opportunity to play. I actually thought his start in Winnipeg, that was his first career start at IG Field, just down the road for me here in Winnipeg on Pembina Highway, was very good, all things considered. I've seen a lot of quarterbacks come to that hostile environment. It was a sellout crowd and fold. And that is not what Cameron Dukes did, despite the fact that he played at a very small college in the United States. So obviously, I think the Argos are a better team with Chad Kelly under center, but I don't think that there is a massive drop-off from Chad Kelly to Cameron Dukes, especially with the weapons that they have around him. Now, from the CFL side of things, I think that the 9-game suspension was warranted. The interesting thing to me is going to be, will Chad Kelly and the Players Association appeal? Because we know that the PA has filed a appeal to get the full 87-page investigative report that was put together by a partner of the CFL, which led to the suspension. As far as we know right now, the PA has still not received it, but depending on whether or not they get it, and of course, their review of the document, if they do get it, I think it is possible that Chad Kelly could appeal this, and in which case, he could see the field potentially in the first 9 games of the season. I know head coach Ryan Dinwiddie has said they're preparing as though Chad will not be in the lineup. They're almost treating it as like a long-term injury that they're dealing with. But certainly still, the story is not close to being over. I think we are in the middle of this story, and we'll have to wait and see how the rest plays out.
John, it seems odd that if, and if I say anything that's wrong, please jump in and correct me. If he appeals the suspension, he can immediately come back to training camp and play until a decision is made on the success or failure of the appeal. Am I right there?
I believe that is correct, yes.
Then from the Players Association perspective, why haven't you launched the appeal already? Are you going to wait until you get this 480-page report, read it, analyze it, get a legal opinion on it, et cetera, before you file the appeal? In which case, then Chad Kelly potentially has missed some, all of training camp, maybe the first game, too, who knows what. It seems odd from the Players Association perspective that they haven't launched the appeal already.
Well, I think getting the document is part of it, but I also think part of it could potentially be strategy, right? If the suspension is not going to be served until game 1 of the regular season, right? You could suspend a player during the offseason, but until the regular season hits, that suspension, for all intents and purposes, is just a paper move, right? A paper transaction. Once the appeal is filed, and players do have the right to appeal up until the suspension is served, it's in the best interest of the player to appeal close to the start of the regular season. I'm not saying Chad Kelly is or is not going to do that, but if you're a player and you want to play, which they all do, from a strategic standpoint, it makes sense to wait. So I do think that the PA is legitimately waiting on this review in determining whether or not they will support Chad in his desire to appeal. If he does have that desire to appeal, we also know from a statement that Chad's agent gave to 3 Down Nation that they are currently considering the appeal process, or at the very least looking into the appeal process. So, I think some of the delay is legitimate, but it is also a player's right to file the appeal whenever they want to, whether that's going right up to the 11th hour come the start of the regular season. That is up to them.
John, changing gears, but still with Chad Kelly, I mean, this looks like, and there's probably lots of blame to go around in different directions, but it looks like another example of where the Canadian Football League has shot itself in the foot collectively, and I'm talking about Players Association, player, league, in terms of how this thing has been investigated, how this has been communicated. Chad Kelly showing up at training camp, everybody wondering why the heck's he here? I thought he was on suspension. Your thoughts on what image this is leaving others with of the Canadian Football League?
Well, I mean, I don't think the CFL erred at all here. I think the CFL did a lengthy investigation, though they didn't release the details of that investigation due to privacy reasons. They slapped their reigning MOP with possibly the longest suspension in league history. The group I think erred here in a big way is the Toronto Argonauts, who trotted Chad Kelly out for rookie camp and didn't appear to think that would bother anybody. And Pinball Clemens, the club's GM, though he's, I would say in practice, more of the team president, with John Murphy, who's technically a consultant, being more of the actual GM. Pinball seemed surprised almost when speaking to the media that people were upset, saying, well, we're following all the CFL's rules, because of course it is up to the team if a suspended player remains around the club and attends practices. But simultaneously, something can be technically allowed, but very distasteful. And I think the Argos realized their error with the backlash that came out, including a couple of prominent female CFL staffers releasing statements expressing their disappointment in the Toronto Argonauts' handling of the situation. And they have now said that Kelly will not be participating in team activities for the foreseeable future. So to me, I think the CFL should have been quicker to launch the investigation. But that, to me, is the only error they've really made through this situation. To me, the real disappointment has been the Toronto Argonauts' handling of the situation, and I don't think grasping the full weight of how seriously people are taking it.
There's a difference between following league rules and just making your own decision and not being tone deaf and sensing the temperature of the mood, and maybe the Argos have failed in that regard. You want to add something to that?
I think it's important, and John, you've already hit on this. And picture this in any other league in the world. League MVP, longest suspension in league history. That says volumes right there.
it's not a good look for the league or the Argos or anybody connected. I wanted to mention you live in a city of spoiled sports fans, John Hodge, in Winnipeg. The Jets, their last 2 playoff exits notwithstanding. The Blue Bombers have now been to 4 straight Grey Cups and counting. COVID wasn't even in our vocabulary the last time the Blue Bombers didn't make it to the Grey Cup, and Zach Collaros was our quarterback, god dang it. Looking at Winnipeg's history lessons aside, the foundation of that team has always been its defense, and the anchor of that D has been the trio of Jackson Jeffcoat, Willie Jefferson, and Adam Bighill. Jeffcoat is now retired. Jefferson can now be called Old Man Willie in football terms, and he just turned 33. Bighill, who showed signs of breaking down last year, is even older than the other 2 guys. What kind of confidence do we have that that Blue Bomber defense and its foundation still has some mileage left?
Well, I think the Bombers were rightfully criticized last year, even back in 2022, for not starting to overturn this roster a little bit, right? We all know how good this team is. They won 14 games last season. As you mentioned, they've been to 4 straight Grey Cups, winning 2, coming very close, by the way, to winning the 2 that they ended up, of course, losing to Toronto and Montreal, respectively, the last couple seasons. But we all know that football is a young man's game, right? And with Jackson Jeffcoat retiring, I think this team is in a position to bring in some fresh blood, right? You never want to overcorrect, I think, as a personnel person and push out all your vets at once, but you also are going to be on borrowed time, right? If you never turn the roster over and suddenly everybody's getting old at the same time. I mean, this time last year, coming into training camp, it was like, okay, there's literally 1 or 2 spots up for grabs. Right now, I've got an article up at 3 Down Nation about the training camp battles in Winnipeg. By my count, there are 7, including one on special teams with Janarian Grant, the team's former all-star return specialist, not returning. So to me, it's an exciting time in Bomberland. Can the defense maintain things? I think they will, and I think actually we're going to see some exciting new wrinkles from the unit, given the fact that they've got a brand new defensive coordinator in Jordan Younger. Younger was, of course, on the staff last year as the club's DB coach, but Richie Hall is no longer the defensive coordinator. He's going to be around still as a consultant, offering feedback and ideas to Mr. Younger, but I'm sure he is going to want to put his own spin on the defense that this team has. So I think overall, if you're a Bomber fan, you know, the loss of Jermarcus Hardrick to Saskatchewan at right tackle is probably the biggest concern to you. We all know how important it is to protect the quarterback at the professional level. And Zach Collaros, you know, being age 35 now, I think is going to need better protection than ever. But defensively, I think if you look at a guy like Celestin Haba, who started a number of games last year, averaged about 1 sack per start opposite Willie Jefferson, I think that's encouraging. And I'm excited to see who else steps up. Tyrell Ford, for instance, young Canadian former 2nd-round pick out of the University of Waterloo, I think is going to get a legitimate shot to earn one of those starting jobs at corner after spending a portion of last season with the Green Bay Packers in the NFL. So defensively, I think this team will be fine. To me, the offensive line is the group I'd be a little bit more concerned about with some of the turnover they've had there.
Changing of the guard in Winnipeg, a new look with their identity and a new hairstyle from John Hodge. Not the only new thing coming out of Winnipeg. Thanks for doing this, pal, and you can read all of John's stuff at 3downnation.com. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks for having me, guys. Anytime.
That is our good friend John Hodge joining us. Up next, Marshall and I dive into who came in during the offseason and who went out. You're watching In the Huddle on Access Now Sports.
Tune in for your chance to win big with the Access Communications Children's Fund TV Bingo every Saturday at 5 with a prize board between $7,000 and $15,000. Cards are $14 with all proceeds going to the Access Communications Children's Fund. Watch and play every Saturday at 5 for your chance to win. The Access Communications Children's Fund TV Bingo, only on AccessNow TV. This week's jackpot is $2,500 in 50 numbers or less. Visit myaccess.ca/TV Bingo for more.
Every child deserves a chance. That's the dream behind the Access Communications Children's Fund. Our registered charity provides assistance to local organizations with projects helping children at risk or in need across the province. Since launching our registered charity in 1992, we've donated over $3.5 million to projects in Saskatchewan. If you know a nonprofit or charitable organization in need of funding, we encourage you to visit myaccess.ca/children's fund.
Hi, I'm Colin Pooler with the Ball Leadership Podcast. Listen and laugh as we learn from leaders making impact in Saskatchewan. Watch on AccessNow TV. And don't worry, you don't have to be bald to enjoy it.
And welcome to our inaugural episode of the 2024 season. Brendan McGuire and Marshall Hamilton, very excited for another season of In the Huddle here on AccessNow TV. And we have more ways that you can watch. Our season premiere is free for everyone to watch on www.youtube.com/@AccessNowTV. We thank everyone for watching on YouTube. And if you would like to watch the rest of the season, you can see it on the AccessNow TV app. Go to www.accessnowtvapp.ca to sign up. $3.95 gets you every episode of In the Huddle, Pats TV, Locker Talk, and Access Now sports coverage of the WCBL, Regina Thunder, and the Regina Pats. I know I have that app, and it works very, very nicely. Set it up right by my Netflix app and everything else on my Apple TV. Let's get to the question of the week. Our first one of the year. Where will the Rough Riders finish this season? Looks like third place, getting number one, 34.1%. And that's where I come in. I picked the Riders to finish in third place just because I don't think that they've proven enough to me that they can compete with BC or Winnipeg. And even though the Rough Riders have a lot to prove to me, the two Alberta teams, Edmonton and Calgary, have a lot more to prove to me. Marshall, have you given this some thought?
Yeah, I have. And before I give you my answer, the first reaction, to be frank, when I saw the results was, and this isn't anything new, this just sort of reinforced for me, Saskatchewan fans are smart football people. They're not blind fans, they're not dumb fans, they're not uneducated fans. They're really smart football fans. And the results, in my opinion, demonstrate that. Back to your question, I probably would have picked third as well. I think BC's still a really strong football team. And Winnipeg, yeah, we talked with John Hodge about them getting old, but they still have that same culture, that winning culture. And Richie Hall, maybe he's in kind of a semi-retirement mode. He's a big part of that. But as long as they got O'Shea as their head coach, as long as they got that veteran presence throughout the lineup, even if it's getting to be old Willie and old Big Hill, et cetera, they're still going to be a formidable football team. And they have found ways, with Dalton shown as the most obvious example. They found ways to insert new young players in every once in a while, and they hit the ground running at full speed. So they're going to be a good football team. BC's going to be a good football team. Calgary and Edmonton aren't going to be easy either. So I probably would have picked third as well.
Yeah, I just think that Calgary and Edmonton are too much of a question mark. And even Winnipeg, if they have lost a step, they have to show us that they've lost a step. And we have learned in the past that teams' identities can change successfully. I think about there's been no more, in my mind, consistent program in the National Football League for a long time than the Baltimore Ravens. And forever, it was all about defense. And Ray Lewis and Ed Reed. And then over time, they evolved to now it's about Lamar Jackson and that exciting offense. And I feel like there's a lot of comparables there with Winnipeg. And it'll be interesting to see if they can complete that transition as some of these defensive stars age out. Of course, like every other offseason, it was one of in and out. And we had a few we wanted to go through. Of course, big change. Corey Mace in, Craig Dickinson is out. I just want to say I think that the change was due. I don't think anybody would argue with that. I think if there was ever an argument, there were some in the fan base who thought that the Riders should have even gone deeper than that. But I do want to say it doesn't change my regard for Coach Dickinson. John Hodge said, no, not John Hodge. Taylor Shire said earlier, good person, nice guy. I hope he does well in Calgary. But a good change.
Yeah, I think that's a positive change and a necessary one. I think most fans would agree with that. I think I think anybody that knows football and knows Dickinson knows that he's a good football coach. Is he a good head coach, or does he have all the skills necessary to be a successful head coach? That's where I would say I don't think so. Corey Mace, too early to say whether he has the ability to make that step. But as I said earlier in the program, he's taken some really important, good first steps, and he's off to a good start. So in terms of X's and O's, which one's a better coach from an X's and O's perspective? Bluntly, I don't care, because I don't think that's the role of a head coach. I don't think that the head coach's job is X's and O's. It's about leadership. It's about accountability. It's about communication with the team, communication with the players, communication with the fan base, etc. Communication with the general manager. And I think Corey Mace, as I said, is off to a really good start.
Yeah, and when you talk about the X's and O's, I think that's more what we want from the coordinators.
Yeah, that's a Mark Mueller job. That's your defensive coordinator job. That's your special teams coach job. That's their jobs.
Some other ins and outs. One thing that generated a lot of chatter over the last couple of months, new broadcaster in, Dave Thomas out, Michael Ball. I just want to say, early in my broadcasting time, I remember working in Estevan Weyburn, and one of my many bosses, a guy by the name of Cameron Burney, our Weyburn viewers will remember really well, gave me cassette tapes to learn how to do a hockey broadcast, and it was the Anavet Cup from 2001 of Cam and Dave Thomas doing the broadcast. So Dave's good Saskatchewan guy, been around forever, incredibly humble. The broadcast is not about Dave. I think he'll roll right in without any issues. Michael, very grateful to him. I feel like a lot of the stuff that I get to do today, whether it be on the radio or on TV, is because of Michael, good friend of the show.
Yeah, I have nothing bad to say about Michael Ball. He was always good to me, and I enjoyed working with him in the short times that I've had to work with him. I don't know anything about Dave Thomas other than what you've described. It's going to be a change. Is it a good change or a bad change? Time will tell. I mean, I haven't even listened to any of his broadcasts. I know that Michael Ball was a very excitable broadcaster and play-by-play guy, and some people liked that and some people didn't like that. So, the verdict, for me, the verdict's out, but it's a position that, that's not going to make or break the success of this football team. And that's way more important to me than who's broadcasting the games.
And very, very subjective as well over who's good, who's not good at it. In and out, of course, our good pal Greg Stanton retired after many, many years. So replacing him, we have Emmett Kish. You have Shaq-sized shoes to fill, my friend. We'll see if you're up to the challenge. Now we'll call it the Emmett.
But if I can comment on that, I mean, Greg has some big shoes to fill, but I'm sure glad that we don't have a cameraman that's a Winnipeg Blue Bomber fan anymore. So, Greg, I hope you have a great retirement, but it'll be nice when I get to do some paintings of Saskatchewan Roughriders instead of Zach Collaros.
I was just going to say,
Winnipeg Blue Bomber jersey.
No more of those unsightly Zach Collaros paintings. I think we still have time to talk. Oh, okay, we will wrap that up, and that'll do it for our first episode of 2024. Wow, we made it through. Everyone survived. On behalf of our entire crew and our fearless leader, Spencer Burridge and Marshall Hamilton, this is Brendan McGuire saying thanks for watching, and good night from Regina.
In the Huddle is presented by Access Communications, bringing you Saskatchewan's teams. Brought to you by the official vehicle sponsor for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, Capital Automotive Group. We drive Rider Nation.
If you'd like to share your feedback on the program you just watched, contact us today. Or join the conversation on social media.